Hello everyone, thank you for joining. I hope you're all well and safe in these challenging times that we're facing. My name is Chris Butler. I'm a Principal Consultant in Sungard Availability Services. This is the next in our series of webinars looking at a range of resilience issues relating to the challenges we're all facing from COVID-19. Today I'm going to consider cybersecurity. We have been seeing a rise in sophisticated ransomware attacks anyway, going all the way back to WannaCry and most recently with Sodinokibi, the ransomware behind the Travelex attack this recent new year. These attacks have become more sophisticated, more complex, more targeted and more damaging. There is so much personal data for sale now on the dark web that it's becoming increasingly difficult for cybercriminals to monetize data thefts, and consequently they seek alternative ways to extract money, and these ransomware attacks are perhaps one outcome of that. The COVID-19 situation also adds significant cyber complexity for all concerned. Many more organizations are asking their employees to work remotely from the main office location, whether that is from home or from another location. And the challenges facing the IT and security teams in managing the risks are huge. There are therefore opportunities for cybercriminals here, given a significantly increased attack surface, many more potential vulnerabilities, many more opportunities to play on the worries and concerns of us all, whether individuals or organizations. My colleague Asher de Metz has described COVID-19 as a hacker's best friend, and it's not difficult to see why. Email scams abound, with the World Health Organization being a target of a cyber attack, and many coronavirus-related email scams and malware sites are being established. The question is, are companies accepting dangerous security risks in trying to keep their organizations going? I want to look at some of the issues and perhaps suggest some of the solutions. Why don't we run through some of the more recent cyber attacks in short order. As reported by various reputable cybercrime watch groups, ransomware attacks against individuals are on the decline, but attacks against business have seen a 195% increase in 2019 on the same period in the previous year. Recent events include the cyber attack on Moller-Maersk, the global shipping company, the efforts by the IT team to reinstall their IT environment included having to deal with 4,000 servers and 45,000 PCs, and luckily they had a backup to do that. This is the world's largest shipping, or one of the world's largest shipping organizations, and they had to revert to manual procedures, running the entire global fleet by pencil and paper and phone. The costs so far have been in the order of £250 million and rising. Another more recent indeed, cyber attack was on Travelex, as I briefly mentioned earlier. They were hacked through unpatched VPN servers, and they had been warned of the issues in their company. The ransomware demand for them was in the order of £4.6 million to start with anyway, and whilst there was no indication of lost or compromised data, the impact on the organization was severe, whether through individuals or through their corporate customers such as Sainsbury's Bank. The potential GDPR fine for them could be as high as £30 million. And more recently, their parent company, Finabler, has issued a profit warning to the tune of £25 million. The third recent example is that of Norsk Hydro, the Scandinavian aluminium smelting organization, which was hacked in a deliberate, targeted, long-planned operation. It used a Trojan horse email through phishing, which is a very realistic and well-targeted attack, the attachment in which was absolutely designed to look like normal business operations for that company and the department in that company. Now, of course, Norsk Hydro has refused to pay this ransom and so far has spent north of $40 million equivalent in remediation. And notably, as part of their response, they had to ask retired workers who remembered the old manual ways of running factories to come in to help them to continue their critical business activities. I'm sure people can recognize that in the current environment. We have also seen two notable ransomware attacks against two states in North America. These are noticeable because those federal states took the decision to pay the ransom to the criminals using taxpayers' money. One ransom demand was for $500,000 and the other for $600,000. Now this goes against FBI advice not to pay ransomware, and indeed that would be the official advice from any government organization. But their decisions were taken on the balance of risk against the cost of remediation and trying to get the data back as municipal authorities of their taxpayers. And government authorities consider that this highlights a trend that actually is only going to embolden cyber criminals to carry on down that route. Now, of course, fines against companies that are seen to not do enough to protect their data and their IT systems have been increasing and have been so far about £1 billion worldwide. The ones that we might be familiar with are the fine, or the provisional fine at the moment certainly, for BA of £183 million for not taking sufficient action to protect its customers' personal data. Another you may well be familiar with is the Marriott Hotel Group, which was fined $124 million, equivalent for a data breach that was already active when they bought the Starwood hotel chain, and their fine was for failing to do due diligence of the data protection in place at Starwood at the time. It's always useful to remind ourselves of the global risks as they've been assessed over the years, because people do spend a lot of time and effort to assess the likelihood and the impact of risks globally. This chart comes from the World Economic Forum, which shows all the top 5 global risks in terms of both likelihood and impact. And they do this annually, and we have chosen to extract 2008, 2013, and last year, 2019, just to compare. And what you will see there is, of course, that cyber attacks were very prominent in terms of the likelihood of the attacks last year, but they also weren't in the top 5 for impact. And also note, please, that pandemics does not appear in last year's table. This wasn't on anyone's radar in 2019, and actually you go back to 2008 when it was there. So basically what we're saying here is that risks creating uncertainty are on the increase. Natural disasters, for example, and extreme weather, which we have seen in North America. Risks creating complexity are increasing. For example, wide-scale events that affect whole supply chains. Risks with adversaries are increasing, such as the cyber attacks we're talking about. But actually, the question is, are black swan events also increasing? The type of event that is a surprise, has a major, very widespread effect, and is the kind of event where people think it could never happen here. Now, I wonder if the COVID-19, the current pandemic, fits into this mold. And the challenge faced with this evolving risk landscape for companies is that plans, whether business continuity, disaster recovery, or cybersecurity, or indeed other plans, they all tend to work well when people have got a series of known knowns in front of them, and you perhaps had a chance to rationalize and plan ahead for this event. But they do not work so well. The experience of our current customers is that they are finding it challenging to use these plans effectively when you're faced with something that goes way beyond expectation or your planning or indeed your experience. So what you need there is the ability to be flexible, adaptable, and agile to respond in the face of these threats. Another way of looking at these risks of disruption come from the Business Continuity Institute's Horizon Scan report last year. They looked at the global threats to business continuity. Again, you'll see that cyber is in the top 5 disruptions of 2019, but if you look closely, you'll see that disease outbreak, which you could take to mean pandemic, was a higher impact, lower frequency event, which you see in the top left, the upper left orange quadrant. It's the grey circle. So that clearly wasn't an issue in 2019. And equally, when asked to consider the next 12 months, that same report and its respondents still had cyber as the #1 risk for this year, for the current year, but note that the disease outbreak or pandemic has dropped into the green quadrant, which just goes to show the difficulty in determining what to focus on and to what a depth of analysis, which again comes back to the black swan point. Do we need to think more carefully about some more extreme even lower probability but extremely high impact type events that we probably haven't really considered before. And the final way of looking at these global risks is through the Alliance Risk Barometer, again from last year. And it shows that business interruption is the top risk, and actually that's for the 7th year running, but with cyber instance coming a close second. So therefore, what we've actually got in the current situation in this year is a combination of the potential for both of those to come together, which makes it an incredibly challenging situation, because we are seeing business interruption at the moment, and we've got the risk of cyber attacks and the increased cybersecurity risk that companies are facing. Business interruption includes breakdown of core systems, product recalls, quality, terrorism, political violence, rioting, environmental pollution, and now pandemic. All of these bring businesses to a standstill. So therefore firms are unable to produce products and services or in reduced capacity, or customers just aren't able to get to the business. And this clearly has a devastating effect on revenues, and we can absolutely see this happening today. But one of the features of today's business interruption is that we have it without any technological failure or unavailability. We seem to have all of our IT systems available to us, and this isn't something perhaps that people had planned for. But with cyber, of course, this threatens to add even greater complexity, and the costs were already increasing of cyber attacks, and the average insured loss from a cyber incident is about 2 million euros, compared with 1.5 million euros from other types of loss. And actually some of the losses from major events are going to be in the hundreds of millions or higher. And cyber losses and cyber incidents can bring their own business interruption losses. I'm coming back to my point that the combination of these two events is going to be the greatest single challenge for companies, organizations this year. So the risks that really, or the more detailed cybersecurity risks that companies will face this year are going to include an increase in ransomware attacks, both in scale and severity. Phishing attacks will become more targeted and sophisticated to take advantage of the attack surface that now exists. Third parties and suppliers will also be targeted more often. And things like business email compromise attacks and spear phishing and whale phishing on the senior executives will also increase. Add these risks all together creates a more complex working environment, and the challenges to businesses are really, really expanding exponentially. So let's start to look more detail at where we are just now with some examples. So experts from the National Cybersecurity Centre have revealed a range of attacks are being prepared online. Actually, that's at the moment, at current times, from cyber criminals who are seeking to exploit all the vulnerabilities through COVID-19 and the way businesses are affected. Techniques seen since the start of this year include bogus emails with links claiming to have important updates or critical safety information, which once clicked on leads to devices being infected. The NCSC has seen an increase in the registration of web pages relating to the coronavirus, suggesting that cyber criminals are taking advantage of the outbreak. And earlier, also in February, on the 16th of February indeed, the World Health Organization warned of fraudulent emails sent by criminals posing as the WHO. This followed a warning from the US Federal Trade Commission about scammers spreading phishing clickbait via email and social media, as well as creating fraudulent websites to sell fake antiviral equipment. Cyber criminals have also impersonated the US Center for Disease Control, creating domain names similar to the CDC's web address to request passwords and even Bitcoin donations to fund a fake vaccine. So what do we think the main issues are for organizations then? Well, there's a range, and I'll just pull out a few just now. One of them are the issues around home network security. As companies ask their staff to work from home, they lose control over the security of the networks behind which these employees work. So questions include, what about patching of machines, laptops, PCs? Is it up to date? Are the firewalls and antivirus software, are they up to date? Are the routers patching up to date? Do they have suitable security on their home Wi-Fi, including of those routers, and have the default passwords been changed? To what extent do people have access to or availability of secure connections, such as VPNs, at home? Do you have sufficient to provide your employees? So that's one issue, the security of people's ability to work at home. Another one is, of course, what it is you're asking them to do at home. So what kind of corporate data is being processed? Is it just anonymized? Is it personal data at all? Is it health data? Is it financial data? What is it that they're doing when they're at home, and what are the security issues that might sit around that? If they are processing corporate data, especially sensitive corporate data, on insecure means at home, then you may have a significant problem, and you certainly have an increased level of risk. Because working from home does open up for an organization thousands of new network access points, and therefore increasing the attack surface around and on the organization. For example, somebody might have at home dormant malware that's been clicked on in a purely personal email that's sitting on a home device somewhere, and that somehow managed to get into the home network. It might have come in through an Internet of Things device. That might leave that dormant malware on the system at home, waiting for the moment to strike. And if you multiply that across your employees who are all working from home, it just takes one of these to come in and you have a problem. Because there's a potential for credential theft or hijacking of accounts when it's outside the corporate network creates a more significant, much more significant risk. So by way of example, about some of those risks here, if I may, I'd like to remind the audience of the unchanging nature of the world's top 20 passwords. Now I know corporately strong passwords are enforced in increasing regularity. However, if it's at home, then you just do not have any control of what passwords people have on any of their home devices. How difficult are these to crack? And if your home workers are guilty of this, how vulnerable does this make you? Well, in terms of the ability to crack those, this won't come as any surprise either. So answering my own question, how difficult are these to crack? They're not. So if your staff do have weak passwords at home, they can be cracked with incredible speed, and it just increases the attack. It's increasing the risks on your network through this enhanced, larger attack surface that I'm describing. Back to my list of issues. You need to understand then which staff members are using their own devices at home. What have you allowed them to do? It's been increasingly the case that bring your own device or access to online services, software as a service type of services, is being allowed through any device. But you need to understand what devices are being used. This is something that I think companies need to take or pay more attention to. The devices that staff members are using at home could be old, unpatched, they've got out-of-date software, they could be containing the dormant viruses that I've been mentioning. You need to consider specific advice for these workers and even consider limiting access to specific data and or information types. Logging into a corporate network via VPN is good, but if it's done from a personal laptop that isn't up to date, doesn't have the right patches, or if it's already got that infection on it, then it's increasing the risk. Interestingly, it's estimated that about 82% of people have never changed their default router password. If you've got specific IT hardware requirements, it's for good reason, and now is not the time to relax your baseline security standards, no matter the pressures. You need to find other ways to work around these issues. Enterprise security tools are significantly better than ones individuals can and will download free from the internet. So you should think about providing staff with the appropriate tools that they need. Consider also encryption and how you manage that. Is it enabled, and in what conditions? For example, do you manage to encrypt it at rest? There's no time like the present to remind and re-educate staff on the potential security risks. Make sure you've refreshed your protocols to allow working from home, taking into account your assessment of the likely timescales that this will be happening. An organization's cybersecurity culture will be the difference between those who succeed and those that fall victim. And using this time of crisis to enhance your organization's cybersecurity culture, so identify and embed lessons already identified and spread, introduce new concepts around remote working practices and vulnerabilities, taking into account how people actually work, and developing your people's knowledge of what's needed are all good things that you should do. Again, if you haven't done so, no time like the present to make sure you've got clear and workable policies and procedures for working from home. And if you've got existing ones, adapt them for the long term. You need to make sure that these procedures are easy to follow. You have to remember that staff are people, people behave like humans, and you've got to focus on the human behavioral elements and the dynamics that people are facing in a extended, protracted working from home environment. You have to make it in the best interest of staff to follow your procedures using a carrot rather than a stick. Making it easier is the way to succeed. Obviously, setting strong passwords for access to third-party services is essential, alongside, of course, your own systems. And things like two-factor authentication and the rapid implementation of collaboration tools are all going to provide security as well as enabling people to work effectively from home. You should also be looking at your cybersecurity incident response procedures and make sure that staff know how to report security issues when they're remote from the office and remote from teams. They need to be able to do that rapidly from even when they're working at home, because increased home working gifts cyber criminals more opportunities. So what you should be doing is constantly reviewing your plans, keeping those up to date and discussed at both the IT level but also the crisis level. The executive, if you suffer a cyber attack in this phase, will need to know, and they of course are going to be working remotely as well. So you have to adapt and adjust your plans throughout the organization. Good practice will ensure that all of these are aligned and they're useful, and they should hopefully continue to protect your organization, especially from legal or regulatory interest. The final thing, of course, to do is to clearly communicate to staff, do this frequently, and make sure they understand what's expected of them. Good communications are a feature of any crisis response. Now, whilst we're perhaps looking at this in the long term, the fact of people working remotely over an extended period really brings back the focus on really, really effective communications, both to and from members of staff. There is a range of advice out there, and the NCSC site is a particularly helpful and comprehensive website, and they do see their role to advise and assist all companies with their cybersecurity. But for organizations, they need to take this advice, apply it, and critically help staff to deliver on the advice that they are giving to them. It's not good enough just to parrot, phrase, and pass on this great NCSC advice. If you tell your staff to ensure that they have a secure home Wi-Fi connection, go a step further and show them how to check their networks, the types of security running on it, and offer advice and actions to improve setups at home where necessary. It's important not to assume that staff automatically know what they're doing, they're familiar with how to do this, and that it will just happen because you've said it needs to happen. For employees, of course, you also absolutely have a key role to play in the current environment. You do have a duty to understand and apply the policies set by your company, making sure that you remain vigilant at all times and follow the procedural as well as the technical support you've been given. It's likely your company has made a significant and rapid investment in hardware and services, including VPNs. They're there for a reason, and you should use them in line with policy. But there are aspects your company cannot control. For example, making sure your home router is set to its optimal security and change the default password. Set up safe working spaces for you and your family. It may well be that you are one of two parents and several children, all working from home, schooling from home, competing for bandwidth, competing for attention, for devices, and for network access. You shouldn't be tempted to let other family members use your work devices, as this could inadvertently raise the risk to your organization. And this is particularly important if your job involves working with sensitive data. Finally, of course, be super double extra vigilant about the proliferation of emails that are doing the rounds. Treat every email with some caution and make sure that you understand, and members of your family understand, about the sophistication of phishing emails. So I'd like to thank everyone for watching this webinar and urge you all to think about your current cybersecurity posture in the context of your own situation, where your business is at the moment, both operationally as well as geographically, and what is important to you right now. If I might summarize then, I'd ask you to refresh your cyber response plans and procedures and keep them up to date. Refresh your employee education and training to enhance their awareness, but make sure you include a focus on behavioral issues that come from extended remote working. Spread lessons identified and act on them as they happen, and maintain your situational awareness of developments and incidents from outside your organization. Proactively assist staff to become more cyber secure at home, showing them how to set up secure networks, change passwords, and improve their working practices. Don't assume that it will happen by itself. And finally, make sure your endpoint protection and security is what it needs to be, not what is easiest. Bring your own device is fine as far as it goes, as long as you understand the risks, and limit access to certain services or data if you cannot be assured of the security of the device accessing it. If you'd like to know more about how we at Sungard Availability Services can help, please do get in touch, and of course you can always look me up on LinkedIn as well. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to tune into this webinar, and I'd ask you all to stay safe in the current environment. Thank you and goodbye.